Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this Brain Injury Group SIG meeting. I am really sorry for the delay in starting. We had a couple of tech issues, which is unusual, so thank you for your patience. So today we're going to be hearing from Sarah Grimshaw. Sarah is at Rehabilitate Therapy Limited. She is a clinical specialist occupational therapist, senior associate and service development lead. She has expertise in complex cognitive and physical assessment and rehabilitation, working with young adults, certified upper limb FES therapist, orthopedic amputee rehabilitation, neurological and orthopedic splinting, fatigue and life skills management, including sleep, spinal injuries rehab, vocational rehab. She's an accredited wheelchair therapist. She specializes in postural assessment, clinical supervision and vestibular assessment and treatment. So she is very accomplished. Today she is going to be speaking to us about learning or returning to driving. Thank you.
Thanks, Jodie.
Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to do the COVID thing and say next slide, please. So just around returning or learning to drive, how we identify that at Rehabilitate is we go through COPM, which is the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. What that does is it gets the person to look at what they want to return to activity wise. They then prioritise it and then they rate their performance and satisfaction around it. That then turns into their GAS goal. So that's what that means. The client wants to be able to drive or may not have a provisional license when we first go out to see them. The different categories people might want to return or learn to drive is around a car or a motorcycle, but also taking into consideration if they want to return to drive is around whether they're used to drive a van, coach or bus or HGV, especially alongside vocational rehab around the HGV driving. And we've actually done a return to work for somebody who drove a HGV. When we get to them, they've either already informed the DVLA and filled in the medical paperwork, but more often than not, they haven't informed DVLA, and they may or may not have refrained from driving, which can lead to problems because they don't realise that it might void their insurance. Especially if they've not told the DVLA about any medical condition, and also they could be fined if they're pulled over and found to have not informed DVLA. Next slide, please. So there is a huge checklist of medical conditions at DVLA that you need to report on. Traumatic brain injury is definitely one of those, but it's also to consider different things that a person may have, especially if they've had polytrauma. So vision might be one thing, if they've got epilepsy, if they've had any spinal injuries, orthopedic injuries. So it's best to go through those medical conditions just to see if they are reportable. They might have different time frames on them also. So with epilepsy, it depends on whether they've had just one seizure or they've had multiple, what type of seizure they've had, to whether they need to report that around and refrain from driving around 6 months down to 12 months. So it is a good checklist to go through, and all the details are on there that you can check on. Next slide, please. So this is what is brought up on the DVLA website when you check their website, and what it does, it actually tells them that you can be fined up to £1,000 if you don't inform them. What it does is also gives you the link to the form that's relevant, the medical form to fill in. So for most of our clients, it's a car or motorcycle licence, and it's the B1 form. But DVLA will resend those medical forms out if they haven't been filled out and you're reapplying for a licence. Next form, please. So provisional licence applications. So it's either applying via a D1 application pack from the post office, which they're trying to phase out now, and actually they charge more for that. So that's £43 for that application, or via the link which is there, which is £34. We tend to do it via online now, because we can take the client's picture and get that all uploaded. But to apply, the client must be at least 15 years and 9 months old. They must be able to read a number plate from 20 metres away, and I will test that before I even start the application form. I've had a couple of clients that it's brought up that they've got visual problems once we've tested that number plate, so it's always good to test it before we actually do the application form. We've also had overseas applicants and clients, so it's also having given permission to live in GB for those days. I always check through the medical condition declaration on the form and mark those that are relevant, because we have to fill in those medical forms relevant for those conditions. DVLA will send out those medical forms to fill in, but I will already have printed those off and filled them in. I also complete what's called a Rookwood driving battery, and I'll go through that in a moment with you, but that looks at the cognitive function around driving. And the DVLA may check with the GP consultant that the person has seen whether they're fit to drive, and may ask for a driving assessment or a rig assessment. So a rig assessment is literally like a computer screen. So the driving assessment centres may put them on a rig assessment before they actually take them out on in a car. With a GP and consultant, I always will write to that person to let them know what I've actually done, just so they're up to speed, because they actually might send a letter back to DVLA saying that person's fit to drive when actually they're not. So I always keep that doctor informed. Next slide, please. So around once they get a provisional licence through, and that can take some time. I've had a young girl that it took 12 months because they did write through to the rehab consultant that was involved in her care, and we had to do a letter to say that from a medical point of view that she was fit to drive. So they can get frustrated that something's not coming through, especially if they've got friends of a similar age that are getting the provisional licenses through within weeks. So it's managing those expectations. But when it does get through to theory tests, we do a lot of practice with that person, so we can practice the questions and hazard perception. We always recommend that they buy the app that DVLA provide, because there is a free app out there, but it doesn't ask all the relevant questions. And again, they will get frustrated that they're passing on the app and then getting through to the theory test and they're not passing. So we always advise that they buy the app, but I always get them a highway code, and we go through that highway code with them. We do it in relevant chunks because we've got to make sure that cognitively they're processing that information, but also we take into consideration things like fatigue. It's surprising how much information isn't retained because that person is fatigued. We also get our OT assistants involved, where they can go out and practice questions, Also taking them out and looking at hazard perception, and also do things like following sat navs, looking at road signs. So practically taking that person out in the car and getting them to look at the road and what they might come against, and practically seeing what's there. We can also recommend reasonable adjustments by sending an email through to the theory test support at DVSA. So with their booking reference, driving licence number and their demographics. So what we can ask for is things like extra time, a quiet room away from others, because they tend to be in a big full room with multiple people taking their test, and that can be quite distracting to that person. And I've also in the past got someone to read the questions out to the client. I found with one of my clients, he was only reading the beginning of the question and then going straight on to the answer, and he was failing. So we actually got the questions read out and he passed once we'd made that reasonable adjustment. Next slide, please. When it gets to looking at the driving instructor and what vehicle we're driving, some driving assessment centres will give advice regarding the types of vehicle and adaptations required, but we always check before referring. So within the Northwest, there is a test centre, assessment centre over in St Helens that will look at all that. Not every assessment centre will look at adaptations to cars, so we'll always check before referring on. But just to consider things like the people that have got spinal injuries, looking at hand controls. But also what's important is to make sure that a driving instructor's got those adaptations. And there's a really good disability driving instructors website where you can actually click on and find the disability driving instructors out there that have got those adapted cars. And they recommend the driving instructor that have got experience in brain injury also. So I would always, as an OT, go through with that driving instructor what they need to be looking out for. But they're very few and far between now. So I have gone out with a driving instructor that hasn't got experience of brain injury, and I can go out on multiple lessons, assess that client, and then give some advice around strategies to that instructor. They will always be glad of that we're providing that, because they don't know and don't often pick up on the cognitive issues, especially around executive dysfunction and fatigue, where that person is really struggling and they're not moving on within their lessons. Also, we have a contact, you might know him, Pete Hibbard. He's an ex-policeman and did advanced driving, but he's also a driving instructor, and he will go out with people. He's got a lot of experience with brain injured clients, and he will take people out to get that experience, but also around the learners, just to start them off and get some advice around how to get on. And it can also point us in the direction of the best driving instructor to go to. Next slide, please. When we're looking at returning to driving, it's really difficult to decide whether to surrender or not to surrender a driving licence. So what we would always do is check the details of the medical condition to make sure that whether we need to surrender that driving licence or not. But they've got a really good website to look at, the driving guides for health professionals as well. But what we need to consider is the following. So whether a doctor's told them they've got to stop driving for 3 months or more, whether that medical condition is going to affect their ability to drive safely and last for 3 months or more, whether they meet the standards for driving. around their medical condition. And again, it's informing the DVLA of that relevant medical condition that's listed that I gave you before. We can voluntarily surrender the licence, and I've done that with a few clients because it's better to surrender rather than wait for a mandatory revoke to come through. It's so difficult to reapply once we've had a revoked licence. It takes many months more, and I've waited up to 3 years before a licence has come back. So if we can surrender, we will do. What we can also consider is a Section 88, which is under the Driving Act, where a client can still drive, and this allows us to continue driving even if their licence has expired or been surrendered, as long as they've applied or reapplied for a replacement and are waiting to be processed for the DVLA. So I've had a recent case where we'd got a licence back, but unfortunately it had a nighttime seizure. So we actually surrendered the licence through and reapplied for that licence. And because we had done that, they actually allowed that guy to drive under a Section 88 because he was on medication and he hadn't had a subsequent seizure for more than 12 months. So sometimes it is good to surrender and actually then get it back on a Section 88. Next slide, please. What do I do? So I complete the Rookwood driving battery if it's a neurological condition. We then apply for the driving assessment at the client's local driving assessment centre, and there's a website link there. They're all over the country. I cover Yorkshire and the Northwest, so there's RDAC over in Manchester in St Helens. We've got Leeds, William Merritt Centre, and there's also Sheffield and Derby. But what we do is we tend to go through the private route because we actually get a copy of that report from the assessment centre. So a cost for that's around £400, but we do get that report. Sometimes we'll go via the GP, but it's not always feasible, but they do get that assessment for free. Or what I've done in the past, if I've not been involved with that client for a long time, is ask them to self-refer. So that's about £160. But that client then gets the copy of that report. But I always tend to go down that private route, and I will always send any relevant assessment results that I've done. So the Rookwood driving battery will go through with that application. Once I have a date, or what I do is put on the application form that we've applied for a driving assessment via the application form to inform DVLA that we have, and so we've asked for that assessment to happen rather than them come back to us and revoke somebody's licence. So they do tend to wait for that assessment date to come. And like I said before, we also inform the GP of what we're doing, as DVLA might write to them as well. Next slide, please. So the Rookwood driving battery, it's a really good assessment tool. Takes around 45 minutes. It's standardised and it informs us whether a client is capable to drive cognitively. It doesn't give us that practical test, so I would always, whatever somebody scores, send through for a practical driving assessment. But within the driving battery, the lower the score, the better the outcome. So between a score of 0 and 6, it indicates a person is cognitively fit to drive, and it indicates that they may not need a practical driving assessment, but I would always consider that they might need one anyway, especially if that person is used to driving a manual car, and just what that overloads us with cognitively, I would always ask them to do that assessment, because they may suggest that that person then goes on to driving in an automatic vehicle. A score of 6 to 10 indicates that a person might be may not be cognitively fit, but requires a practical driving assessment. And then over 10 is that they're probably not fit to drive, but I would always send them on to a practical driving assessment to confirm it. It gives us a pass, fail or borderline score, and scores it as a 0, 1 or 2. And then there's a link there to go through to have a look at that if you need to. Next slide, please. If unfortunately somebody does get a revoked licence, the client will be sent a letter from DVLA regarding a revoked licence or a refusal of a provisional licence. The letter will give the client a period of time that they're unable to drive, or whether they want to appeal that. And the client can reapply 8 weeks prior to that date stated on there if they do leave it. Again, it's filling in the D1 form, which is either available at the post office or online, and it's free to reapply for that. And then again, I would send a letter through to the GP with any relevant information or assessment results that we have from the Rookwood if we've repeated it. Next slide, please. So on the driving assessment day, what we do is we always remind and reassure the client that it is not a test. It's easier said than done, because people always have that perception that they're getting retested. It is an assessment. They will take them out on the road and look at whether they can practically drive. It is not going through a driving test. We always make sure that the client's got their licence or day licence with them. Sometimes DVLA will send through a day licence just for that day. I always accompany that client to the assessment, and we always then justify that around funds, just because it gets them to settle in. I'm there to advocate for that client, especially through that assessment, and that some assessments aren't repeated. So sometimes, especially with the traumatic brain injury clients, the OT will try and do a standardised assessment. So I would always take a copy of the Rookwood driving battery results with me, so they don't do that. It's literally that they will sit there, ask questions and then take them out. The client always goes out with the driving instructor and the occupational therapist from the driving assessment centre, and I will sit there patiently waiting for them to come back. They will always inform the client what their results are, and there's 3 things really that they'll do. Is either they're fit to drive, they've passed the assessment and they can immediately drive. They require further practice and assessment, so they may go back to the assessment centre, and that's when we sometimes get Pete in to redo that further practice. That they require adaptation to the car or vehicle, and then it's going through and making sure that that's completed, or they will recommend to DVLA that they revoke the licence. We will get a copy of that report, and that report then goes through to DVLA. Next slide, please. And then what to consider going forward. So if they're back to riding a motorcycle, do they need to go onto a provisional for a car? A lot of times they've sustained a TBI whilst they've been driving their motorcycle, and it's fine going through an assessment day, but once they get back on that motorcycle, it's really difficult for them to continue. So I've had a couple of people actually go from their motorbike onto a provisional for a car, and we almost restart and support them through their theory tests for that. We look at the type of vehicle. Do they need to apply for Motability? And we've got to remember that there's always a down payment for that, but also the age of the client. So there's restricted vehicles for clients under the age of 25. So we always got to take that into consideration. But we also look at what car is good for transferring in and out of, whether it needs to be adapted, does it need to be an automatic for their cognitive function, do we need to look at wheelchair accessible vehicles with a ramp, with a driving position, so somebody in a wheelchair can drive straight in and also drive from an adapted steering wheel or a joystick. They do have wheelchair accessible vehicles over in St Helens, and I've sent through quite a few people over there to practice within that wheelchair accessible vehicle, then to get the details then for funding. Practice, so do they need practice getting to places with our OT assistance? Because it's fine once they pass the test, but then it's all the planning and actually driving to somewhere. So we do use our occupational therapy assistants to grade and pace and actually plan and execute that driving practice with that client. Do they need ongoing support? So do we need to put within their care plan with the support workers? I've got a chap at the minute who gets extremely fatigued if he drives over a certain amount of time. So we've actually got the support workers on his Motability insurance where they can take over. So he'll drive to an appointment or drive to where he's going, and then the support workers will drive back. And also, just to keep in mind for those people that have a revoked licence, that we need to reapply for it within that 8 weeks of somebody revoking that licence. And I think that's the end on it.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's been really, really helpful. We managed to get through an awful lot, so we really appreciate it. And sorry again for the delay. I know time is precious, and sorry for the unforeseen technical difficulties. We jinxed it, I think, because we said we don't tend to have them on this SIG. So yeah. Apologies for that.
No problem.
I think you managed to squeeze in a lot of theory and a lot of practical content, and you've certainly given the lawyers a lot of reflection. I think a lot of reflections to be had, both about the role that we can play in restoring independence or encouraging independence through returning to driving or planning to drive, but also the costs that can be associated with driving. I think that's really important that we just push our OTs and our care experts to think about that when we're instructing them as well. We are going to circulate the recording, or a recording will be available after this. So if you've got any colleagues that couldn't make it today, please feel free to let them know about the recording. We have got a few questions. If anyone else has got questions, please put them on the Q&A tab. But I've certainly had some sent to me directly, which is always much appreciated. So the first one is about how, in your experience, Sarah, do the DVLA approach an individual with fluctuating ability? So some days they might have a score of 10, other days they might have a score of 11 on the driving battery that you mentioned. Just interested about how they approach that.
I wouldn't say it's around the cognitive function. It tends to be around fatigue. So it is fluctuating. So it's looking at strategies around whether we can pace and grade that driving for that person using that support worker. I would always, even no matter what score within that Rookwood driving battery, look at somebody having that practical driving assessment, just because I've had some days go really poorly on the Rookwood, so we're umming and ahhing whether they've got that cognitive function, but because of that habitual memory of driving, they've performed really, really well within that practical driving assessment, and they've actually gone on to go back to driving. And also thinking around strategies around whether we can use somebody like Pete Hibbard, who can take people out and build up their confidence and experience of driving, but also looking at using people like the support workers, where somebody can drive for a small period of time and then a support worker take over.
Well, thank you very much. And the next question is really, I think you've touched on it in your presentation a little bit, but just interested to know the division of labour, I guess, between a GP, a hospital consultant, a neuropsychologist, an OT, and a driving instructor. I guess lots of people involved potentially, and it's sometimes quite difficult to know who does what.
It is. I would say we take a lead OT wise, just because it's looking at both the physical and cognitive actions around driving. So we tend to take a lead within that, inform the GP of what we're actually doing, but also work in collaboration with the neuropsychologist around cognitive strategy, especially for those that have performed poorly within the Rookwood driving battery. It might be that the neuropsychologist has already performed that assessment with that person, but practically looking at what we need to do. GP doesn't often see that person, so a lot of information tends to come from a neurologist or a rehab consultant that person's seen following or before their discharge from the hospital. So again, it's being in communication with those people that DVLA will get in touch with that person once we put them on the application form. So DVLA will have a case manager, and they will ultimately make that decision from all that information that we send to them, whether that person gets that driving licence or not.
Great, thank you very much. And what role or what practical tips can you give lawyers in respect of returning to driving? So if they're supporting a client and beyond signposting to the professionals, are there any hints and tips that you can give the lawyers to make your life easier?
I would say definitely funding for a driving assessment, because we would always put that forward, and we would always get a copy of that assessment report that we can then pass on to the lawyers. Also advising people, especially if they've not got OT or neuropsych involved, is to inform DVLA, but support them in doing that they're then not provoking DVLA to revoke their license. So I would say the quicker you can get us in and involved, then the quicker that we can support that person to get a good outcome, because DVLA can be quick to revoke a licence with information that's sent on an application form, and if it's the wrong information, then that can stop that person from driving for a very long time. And it's so difficult to get a licence back once we've got a revoked licence.
Do you ever see the medico legal experts in the litigation comment on driving ability, or is that too specific?
We do, especially the expert OT. They will come and ask for our advice, because we're the treating OTs. So they will ask us around driving and what our opinion is and what we've done with that client as well, just so that they can put it in their report if there's any funding that needs to go forward. But especially if that person's going forward for Motability, because there is that down payment that they've got to make every 3 years. So it's taking that into consideration for the future.
Great. And can I ask about optimum time for rehab in the context of returning to driving? So in your experience, do you tend to see the same kind of pattern, or is it very, very bespoke to the individual?
I'd say it's up to the individual, but I would say it's getting in quick. Same as vocational rehab. If there's a break before that client sees an occupational therapist, we can be looking at revoked licenses, or people not getting back to work, because we've got to sometimes consider that driving's part of their work. So the quicker we can get involved, the quicker we can get in there and do what I've told you today.
Thank you. And I was interested to see if you don't agree with the DVLA's decision on a medical issue, you can appeal, can't you, to the magistrates court, which I thought was quite unusual. I don't have any experience in that, but I was just wondering if you had.
I haven't personally, but yes, I've got colleagues that have. It's the same as appealing PIP. So yes, we have gone down that way and we've appealed and been successful. So yeah, there's always ways. I would say it's working in collaboration with DVLA as well. They're always helpful. We can always get our clients to give consent for us to be contacting DVLA as well, so they're not sat on the phone trying to contact them. So we would always contact DVLA and be as helpful as possible and give all the information that we can. I would say I've had quite a few revoked licenses, but that's because it's been revoked before we've got involved. So yeah, it is difficult and we've not been able to appeal and it can take some time. But yeah, get us in as quick as you can, to be honest.
I think there are quite strict time limits as well, aren't there? It's 6 months, I think, to appeal a decision. So it's just something to be aware of. And what I'd also say, if we're notifying or professionals are notifying the DVLA, we've just got to remember the insurance point as well, just to make those disclosures to the insurer, just to protect our client's position. Great. I don't think we've got any other questions, but presumably, Sarah, you're happy if we circulate your contact details, and if anyone's got any individual queries, they can get in contact with you directly, if that's okay.
No problem.
Thank you very much for your time, and sorry for the technology issues, everyone, once again. It's short and sweet, but I hope you've taken away lots of useful content. I've certainly thought about a lot and will continue to reflect. And so thank you, Sarah, for your efforts. I know it takes a long time to prepare for all of this stuff, and we will keep in touch and put another SIG event in the diary. As always, if you've got any ideas or if you want us to arrange something, this is your SIG just as much as it is our SIG. So just get in touch with me or Jodie and we will put the arrangements in place. Apart from that, it's for me to say thanks for joining and have a nice day.